Once upon a time, in a land of rolling hills and golden fields, there was a wealthy and kind-hearted man named Ezra. He was a man of great wisdom and generosity, known throughout the region for his prosperous vineyards, his vast herds of cattle, and his fair dealings with all who worked for him. But above all, he was known for his love for his two sons, Eliab, the elder, and Zechariah, the younger. Eliab was steady, hard-working, and responsible. He had spent his whole life learning the ways of his father, managing the estate, ensuring the servants were cared for, and overseeing the harvest. He was a man of discipline and order, deeply loyal to his father. Zechariah, on the other hand, was different. He was young, restless, and full of dreams. He often gazed beyond the hills, longing for adventure. The countryside, with its quiet life and predictable seasons, felt like a cage to him. He wanted excitement, freedom, and the pleasures of the great cities he had heard of from passing travelers. One day, Zechariah came to his father with a request that sent a hush through the household. "Father," he said, "I know that one day, when you pass on, Eliab and I will inherit all that you have. But I do not want to wait for that day. Give me my share of the inheritance now, so that I may go out into the world and make a name for myself." Gasps filled the room. The servants whispered among themselves. Such a request was unheard of. To ask for an inheritance while the father was still alive was as good as saying, "I wish you were dead." It was a great insult, a sign of deep disrespect. Eliab clenched his fists, his face red with anger. "How dare you insult our father like this?" he snapped. "Have you no shame?" But Ezra, the father, did not respond in anger. He looked at his youngest son with sorrowful eyes. He knew that forcing Zechariah to stay would only breed resentment. Sometimes, love meant letting go. "Very well," Ezra said at last. And so, he divided his wealth, giving Zechariah his portion. With his bags packed and his fortune in hand, Zechariah set off, never looking back. He felt as if chains had been broken from his feet. The wind was fresh, the sun bright, and the road stretched before him, promising adventure. For weeks, he traveled, passing through towns and cities, marveling at the grand buildings, the bustling markets, and the musicians playing in the streets. Finally, he arrived at a great city, a place unlike anything he had ever seen. It was alive with music and laughter, filled with people dressed in silks, feasting in grand halls, and drinking from golden cups. This, he thought, was the life he was meant for. With his newfound wealth, Zechariah lived extravagantly. He threw lavish feasts, dressed in the finest robes, and surrounded himself with people who praised him, calling him the young prince of fortune. He spent his nights in celebrations, drinking the finest wines and dancing until the sun rose. He believed he had found true happiness, but he did not see how quickly his fortune was slipping through his fingers. Seasons changed, and so did Zechariah's luck. His gold, once abundant, began to dwindle. The friends who once surrounded him vanished as soon as the feasts ended. The musicians who played in his halls moved on to the next wealthy fool. Then disaster struck. A great famine spread across the land. The price of food soared, and work became scarce. Those who once feasted at his table now closed their doors to him. Desperate and ashamed, Zechariah wandered the streets, hungry and ragged. He begged for food, but people turned away. He knocked on doors, but no one remembered the once wealthy stranger. Finally, in utter desperation, he found work, tending pigs for a harsh farmer. For a young man who had once dined on the finest meats, this was the lowest of humiliations. Day by day, he watched the pigs eat their slop, and hunger gnawed at him so fiercely that even their food looked tempting. It was in that filth among the pigs that he came to his senses. "What have I done?" he thought. "Even my father's servants have bread to eat, and here I am, starving. I will return to my father. I do not deserve to be his son anymore, but perhaps he will take me back as a servant." And so, He rose weak and weary, and began the long journey home. As Zechariah neared his father's land, he rehearsed his speech in his mind. "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me one of your servants." But as he approached, something incredible happened. His father, who had been watching the horizon day after day, waiting, hoping, saw him from a distance. With a cry of joy, Ezra ran down the road, his robes flowing, his feet pounding against the earth. Zechariah, overwhelmed with shame, fell to his knees. "Father," he began, "I have sinned." But before he could finish, Ezra pulled him into a tight embrace, tears streaming down his face. My son, you were lost, but now you are found." He called to the servants, "Bring the finest robe. Put a ring on his finger. Prepare a feast. Tonight we celebrate, for my son has returned." Meanwhile, Eliab, the elder brother, returned from the fields. When he heard music and laughter, he was furious. "What is the meaning of this?" he asked a servant. "Your brother has returned, and your father is celebrating," the servant replied. Eliab stormed into the house. "Father," he shouted, "I have served you all these years, never disobeying you, yet you never gave me so much as a young goat to celebrate with my friends. But this son of yours, who squandered your wealth on reckless living, him you welcome with a feast?" Ezra placed a hand on his elder son's shoulder. "My son," he said gently, "you are always with me, and all I have is yours. But your brother was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found. Should we not rejoice?" And so, the house was filled with music and joy, for love had triumphed over bitterness. Some say Zechariah went on to become a wiser man, grateful for his father's mercy. Others say Eliab eventually softened his heart, learning that true love is not about deserving, but about grace. But one thing remains certain: the father's love was greater than pride, anger, or past mistakes. And that love, that deep and boundless love, is what truly makes a home. Now, what do we that are still alive learn from this story? First, life is a journey, and along the way, we make choices, some wise, others foolish. The story of the prodigal son is not just about wealth lost and found, but about the depths of human failure and the power of love that redeems. At its heart, this story teaches us three powerful lessons that speak to the soul of every person who has ever longed for freedom, fallen into despair, or struggled to forgive. 1. The illusion of freedom and the reality of consequences. Zechariah believed that freedom meant escaping his father's rules, spending lavishly, and indulging in pleasure. But in the end, what he thought was freedom led him into slavery. Slavery to his own desires, to the false friendships that vanished with his wealth, and to the painful consequences of his recklessness. How often do we chase after things we think will make us happy, money, power, approval, only to realize they leave us emptier than before? The world offers fleeting pleasures, but true fulfillment does not come from running away. It comes from being in the right place, with the right people, living with purpose. 2. The power of humility and repentance. The moment Zechariah found himself among the pigs, his pride crumbled. It was only in his lowest state that he saw clearly. He had sinned, not just against his father, but against the very foundation of love that had once surrounded him. True transformation begins with humility. When we recognize our mistakes and turn back, even when we feel unworthy, that is the beginning of healing. It takes courage to admit I was wrong, but it is in that moment of truth that redemption begins. 3. The scandalous love of the father. Perhaps the most shocking part of the story is the father's reaction. He doesn't scold, demand repayment, or remind Zechariah of his failures. Instead, he runs to him, embracing him, restoring him, calling for a celebration. What kind of love is this? A love that does not hold grudges, does not keep a record of wrongs, but rejoices in restoration. It is a love that says, "You are not defined by your worst mistakes. You are still my child, How many times have we been like Zechariah, ashamed, lost, afraid to return? And yet, love waits for us, ready to embrace us the moment we take that first step home. And what about the older brother? Eliab represents another kind of struggle, the battle with resentment. He had done everything right, yet he felt overlooked. His anger was justified, but his heart was closed to the miracle before him. How often do we refuse to celebrate another's redemption because we feel they do not deserve it? True love rejoices when the lost are found, because forgiveness is not about who is worthy, it is about grace. The true meaning of home. At its core, this story is about coming home, not just to a place, but to love, to forgiveness, to belonging. We are all the prodigal son at some point in life, wandering, lost, ashamed. But no matter how far we go, no matter how broken we feel, there is always a road leading back. And at the end of that road, there is always love waiting with open arms. And that is the greatest lesson of all. If you enjoyed the story and want more stories like this, hit that subscribe button, comment, and like. Thank you.